Chapter 1, The Cursed Healer. The pup whimpered, a sharp sound that cut through the quiet clearing like a needle through cloth. Celine knelt in the dirt, her fingers stained green from crushed marigold root, pressing the paste gently into the wound along his flank. His tiny body trembled beneath her hand, heartbeat frantic, but he didn't snap. Animals never judged her. They only knew pain, and that she was willing to heal it. From the shadows, pack members watched. They never came close. Their whispers stirred like dead leaves, soft but heavy enough to bruise. Curse-born, daughter of a deserter, tainted blood. Celine kept her focus on the pup. His breathing steadied, the wild panic in his eyes softening into trust. That, at least, was something she could fix. Flesh and bone yielded to her touch. Loneliness did not. Beyond the clearing, smoke and laughter carried from the campfires. Tonight was the mating ceremony, a night of destiny, when the moon goddess revealed fated bonds. Celine's chest tightened at the thought. All her life she'd dreamed of that moment, clung to it like driftwood in a storm. Maybe tonight, someone would look past the curse, past the shame of her father's disappearance, and see her. Not a ghost. Not a stain. Just Celine. The pup licked her hand, pulling her back from her thoughts. She managed a weak smile. "You're braver than I am," she whispered to him. A twig snapped behind her. She stiffened, the instinct of someone too used to being watched. Turning, she froze. Darien. The alpha heir moved with predator grace, broad shoulders, lean strength, a gaze that seemed to pierce through her skin. His scent hit her before his words did, pine, frost, and raw power. It rolled over her like thunder. The mate bond sang between them, sharp and undeniable, a current only they could feel. Her breath caught. The stories were true. The goddess had chosen. Darienne's eyes flicked to the sleeping pup, then finally to her. "Your work is impressive," he said, voice low and commanding. "Few can sue the Fenrir hound." Her throat went dry. "He's just scared. Pain makes everything vicious." For a heartbeat, something flashed in his gaze, a widening, a recognition. Hope surged in her chest, warm and dizzying. But it died just as quickly. His expression cooled, eye sweeping her worn tunic, lingering with disdain. "You're the healer, then." Celine, daughter of the deserter. The bond's music faltered, replaced by the clang of shame. She flinched as the word deserter cut deeper than claws ever could. Darienne's mouth curved into something between a smile and a sneer. "A pity. A tainted bloodline is a weakness this pack cannot afford." Her chest hollowed. The hope that had carried her all these years shattered with cruel efficiency. And yet, his next words twisted the knife deeper. "Still," he drawled, his eyes glinting with something possessive, not tender, "a mate is a mate. The ceremony is tonight. Don't be late." He left her kneeling in the dirt, the pup pressed against her palm, her heart bleeding in silence. If your chest clenched hearing those words, wait, this is just the beginning. Subscribe to the Alpha's Romance Library and stay with us, because Celine's story is about to crack open in ways that will shake kingdoms. Chapter 2, The Alpha's Rejection. The air in the great clearing pulsed with energy, a living, breathing thing made of smoke, firelight, and anticipation. The bonfire towered in the center, flames leaping high enough to lick the stars, sparks floating upward like tiny souls begging for the goddess's blessing. Wolves gathered in their human forms, hundreds of faces illuminated by the glow, every eye turned toward the ritual space. Celine stood on the edge, her hands clenched tight, trying to steady the storm inside her chest. Tonight was destiny. Tonight the moon goddess would reveal the truth every wolf longed for, the other half of their soul. For years she had dreamed of this moment. For years she had prayed that she wouldn't be left outside the circle again, watching everyone else find the belonging she craved. Her heart told her this time would be different. Because she had felt it, the bond. That undeniable current the moment Darienne had looked at her in the clearing earlier, when the pup had rested beneath her hands. His presence had filled her senses like fire catching dry grass. It had been real. It had to be. The Alpha, Darian's father, raised his hands, and the crowd fell silent. His voice rolled over them, deep and commanding, carrying the weight of tradition. Tonight we honor the goddess. Tonight we welcome the bonds she has chosen. Tonight, the future of this pack is sealed. Then he turned to his son. Darian, step forward. Who does the goddess name as your mate? Who will stand as your Luna? The drums slowed, each beat a hammer against Celine's chest. Darian stood tall, proud, every inch the air. Broad-shouldered, golden-skinned, power radiating from him in waves. His dark eyes scanned the crowd, his expression unreadable. And then, he saw her. Their eyes locked, and the bond flared so fiercely it stole her breath. Celine staggered, heat rushing through her veins like molten silver. It was real. It was undeniable. Her lungs burned with relief. The goddess had not forgotten her. Darian began to walk. Each step toward her cut through the crowd, wolves shifting aside like water before a prow. Celine's throat tightened with tears she refused to shed. This was the moment. After years of whispers, shame, and loneliness, her mate was choosing her. She was seen. She braced herself for the touch, for the claim, for the joy she had been denied her whole life. But he didn't stop. Darian walked past her. His shoulder brushed hers, casual, dismissive, as if she were nothing more than air. The bond inside her shrieked in protest, tearing like a string pulled too tight. She froze, horror blooming cold and sharp in her chest. No. No, this couldn't be happening. Darian stopped in front of Cassandra, a warrior as flawless as sculpted marble, with bloodlines so pure they were practically sung in the pack's history. She smiled coldly as he took her hand, lifting it high for all to see. The goddess has blessed me with a strong partner, Darian declared, his voice echoing across the clearing. Then his gaze found Celine again. His eyes cut into her like a knife as he delivered the killing blow. She has shown me that true strength is pure. My line will not be weakened by a tainted bloodline. The words fell heavy as stones, crushing what was left of her hope. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by the hiss of whispers. Then came the laughter, low, scornful, pitying. Wolves shook their heads. Some smirked. Others looked at her with open disgust. Celine's body felt hollow, emptied in a single stroke. The bonfire blurred into streaks of orange and yellow through her tears. Her ears roared with the weight of their judgment. Curseborn. Lowborn mutt. Mistake. The words weren't spoken aloud, but she heard them anyway, in every rustle of cloth, every sidelong glance. Her legs moved before her mind did, carrying her back through the circle. She couldn't breathe under the weight of so many eyes. She couldn't stand as the mate bond burned inside her, raw and unanswered, tearing her apart from the inside out. She stumbled into the forest, branches clawing at her as if the trees themselves wanted to hold her in her shame. She ran until the firelight was gone, until the music of drums and howls faded into mockery in the distance. Only when she collapsed against the roots of a cypress did the sobs tear free, jagged and loud. He had rejected her. Not in private, not quietly, but before the pack. Before the goddess. He had shattered her under the same moon she had prayed to her entire life. Her chest heaved, bile rising in her throat. She doubled over, violently sick, her body convulsing with grief and something deeper. She pressed her palm to her lips, shaking. It wasn't just heartbreak. It wasn't just despair. It was her body telling her a truth she hadn't wanted to face. The exhaustion. The nausea. The strange way her senses had sharpened in the past weeks. She froze, her hands trembling as they pressed against her stomach. No. But yes. A new life stirred within her. Darian's child. Her sobs turned into ragged gasps as realization sank claws into her. He had called her tainted, unworthy, filth. He had cast her aside to preserve his perfect legacy. And yet, his legacy already beat inside her, fragile and fierce, a spark that refused to die. For the first time in her life, Celine wasn't alone. The tears streaming down her face were no longer just grief. They were fury. They were promise. If the pack wouldn't protect her, she would protect herself. If Darian wouldn't claim his blood, she would claim it tenfold. She pressed her back against the cypress, cradling her stomach, and whispered to the darkness, "I will not let them take you from me." If your heart clenched hearing her vow, don't move, because exile is only the beginning. Subscribe to the Alpha's Romance Library and follow Celine into the wilderness, where a cursed healer will become a mother, and a queen forged by fire. Chapter 3, Exile and Birth of Kaelin. The forest swallowed her. Celine ran until her legs shook, until the clearing and the laughter and the bonfire faded into a cruel memory behind her. Branches lashed at her skin, roots clawed her feet, but none of it hurt the way her chest did. Her mate had rejected her. Her pack had turned their backs. The goddess had been silent. Now there was no one left. Except for the small flicker of life growing inside her. That thought cut through her despair like a knife. She pressed her trembling hands against her stomach as if she could shield the child from the weight of her shame. Alone in the dark, she made a vow, "You will live. If the world sees us as cursed, then we will survive as curses. We will endure." Days blurred into weeks. She walked until her feet blistered, until her voice broke from silence, until her body screamed for rest. Hunger gnawed at her belly, thirst clawed at her throat. Still, she pressed on. The healer in her remembered what the pack had never taken from her, the wisdom of roots and herbs. She scavenged wild berries, bitter roots, mushrooms that tasted of soil. She found a spring hidden under moss and drank until her stomach ached. She learned to catch fish with sharpened sticks, to weave snares for rabbits, to strip bark for cord. But each night, when she lay beneath the stars, she felt the weight of her exile. The wolves howled in the distance, her wolves, her people, and not one of them called her name. The months passed slowly. Her belly swelled. Her body ached in ways she had never known. Sometimes she woke in the night drenched in fear, certain she would die alone as her mother had, leaving her pup with nothing but pain. But each time despair threatened to smother her, she would place her hands over the curve of her stomach and whisper, "Not this time. Not us." She found a cave behind a thin curtain of waterfall mist. It smelled of damp stone, but it was hidden and safe. She made it her home, layering moss for bedding, drying herbs on the rocky walls, fashioning crude tools with sharpened stones. The cave echoed with her loneliness, but it was also sanctuary. When the day of birth came, the sanctuary became a crucible. Pain ripped through her body, a tide that returned again and again, drowning her in its violence. She screamed into the dark, no healer's hand to soothe her brow, no mate to share her agony. She bit down on a strip of leather to keep from biting her own tongue, sweat pouring from her as the contractions tore her apart. This was the curse, she thought. The same curse that had killed her mother. It was real. It was waiting to claim her too. But then she felt it. A small, insistent movement inside her. A life pushing forward. Her son fighting to be born. Her pain became a weapon. Her screams became a battle cry. She bore down, every muscle tearing, every nerve on fire, until with one final push, the world exploded into agony and then silence. And then, a cry. Thin, reedy, but alive. Her hand shook as she reached for him. He was small, fragile, his face red and scrunched in outrage, his body slick with the rawness of new life. But he was breathing. He was real. Her son. Celine cradled him against her chest, tears streaming down her face. Kaelin, she whispered, naming him after an old story her father once told of a lone wolf who stood unbroken against the storm. You are Kaelin. You are my heart. The bond between them was instant, fierce, absolute. She had been called a curse her whole life, but this child was proof that she was more than that. He was proof she could create something pure, something worth fighting for. From that night on, survival was no longer just her battle. It was theirs. The weeks that followed tested her in ways she had never imagined. Kaylin's cries woke her at all hours, piercing the stillness of the cave. She foraged more desperately, learning which roots soothed his stomach, which herbs she could brew into tea for herself. She fashioned a sling from vines and scraps of hide so she could keep him pressed against her chest while she hunted. She was no warrior, but hunger sharpened her instincts. She learned to move with the silence of the forest, to stalk prey, to strike fast and without hesitation. Each kill was followed by whispered apologies to the spirits of the animals, her old healer's heart unable to let go of gratitude even in violence. Her body hardened. Her senses sharpened. The girl who once dreamed of being chosen at a bonfire was gone. In her place stood a mother, lean, fierce, unyielding. Sometimes, in the quiet between Kaylin's breaths, she would remember Darian. His smile when he dismissed her. His voice when he called her tainted. The memory no longer broke her. It fed the fire in her chest. She would never crawl back to him. She would never let him take what was hers. She was an exile. A rogue. A mother. And she would fight the world itself if it tried to take her son. If your heart ached through her loneliness and triumph, hold on, because the wilderness has teeth, and the world hasn't finished testing her yet. Subscribe to the Alpha's Romance Library, and follow Celine's journey as survival collides with destiny. Chapter 4, The Rogue's Attack. The morning came thin and blue, the kind of light that makes the forest hold its breath before choosing day. Frost clung to the moss like a quiet warning. Celine slipped from the cave behind the waterfall, Kaylin warm in the sling against her chest, his small breaths painting her collarbone with gentle clouds. She moved with the practiced care of someone who has learned that even kindness has to be quiet when the world has teeth. She skirted the river's edge where the stones were slick and the water spoke in whispers, then cut upslope into the pines. Here the ground was soft with needles, tracks written and rewritten in a language she had taught herself to read. Deer had passed in the night, 2, maybe 3, light, careful, unhurried. Rabbits had scribbled a nervous paragraph near the bracken. A fox had signed its name once and vanished. She weighed each line against hunger and risk, adjusted her path, and kept moving. Kaylin stirred. She paused, pressed a kiss to his crown, and listened. The forest spoke back in its ordinary ways, sparrows arguing, a woodpecker hammering out the day's first decree, the distant creak of a branch complaining about winter's approach. She let the sound settle her, let them fill the hollow places sorrow had left. She had been made silent by shame. The woods, at least, insisted on noise. It felt like a mercy. She found a run of rabbit trails along a tangle of blackberry and knelt to set a snare. Her fingers, sure from a lifetime of bandages and splints, moved quickly, twist, loop, anchor. She checked the wind, turned her body to keep Kaylin's scent downwind, and set 2 more. It was a small gamble that might buy them an afternoon without hunger gnawing behind their ribs. The light brightened by a shade. Somewhere, sun found a gap and slipped through. Celine allowed herself one heartbeat of ease. Then the forest changed. It was not a sound at first, but the absence of one. The quick, collective silence of small things that have learned to survive by listening. The sparrows finished a sentence and did not start another. The woodpecker's hammering stopped mid-thud. Even the river seemed to pull its voice low, as if something had put a hand over its mouth. Celine's spine prickled. She straightened, breath shallow, every instinct waking at once. The wind shifted, cold and metallic, and delivered the truth she dreaded. Wolves. Not pack wolves. Not the disciplined salt and steel scent of patrol. These smelled like hunger turned mean, musk sour with neglect, fermented, breath wrong. Rogues. She drew Kaylin closer, the sling creaking softly as she tightened the knot. Her hands did not shake. Fear, yes, but fear that knew where to put itself. She took 2 steps back toward the river, calculating distance and terrain, mapping the nearest climbable tree, the shallow dip where ground turned treacherous with old mud. None of those options had room for a mother carrying a child. That left only one choice that was not a lie, stand and become something worth fearing. The first rogue appeared between two pines, a gray mass with scars like bad writing across his muzzle. His eyes were wrong, feverish and too bright, a light that had nothing to do with intelligence. Another shadow slid into her left, leaner, ribs laddering under filthy coat. The third arrived last and slow, as if savoring the way fear takes shape in prey. They fanned out, low growls vibrating the ground. Kaelin made a small sound, curious more than afraid. Celine's throat tightened. She kept her voice low, steady, as much for her own body as for his. "Against me," she whispered, tucking him deeper. "Hold on." The rogues tested her with a feint, a quick dart from the left, claws flashing, teeth snapping air. She did not flinch. She had learned, in the months since exile, that terror is a teacher who respects clean movements. Anything extra is a gift to the thing that wants you dead. The largest wolf lunged. Celine met him halfway. The shift tore through her like a storm she had learned to call on purpose. Bone snapped, not in the way of breaking but of remembering. Muscles lengthened, spine rethreaded itself with heat, skin split and closed again as fur raced across it. She hit the earth on 4 paws, larger than she had been the last time she'd changed, the long practice of survival braided now into instinct. Her ribs burned where Darian's last night still lived under skin, but pain could be hosted if it paid its rent. She charged. Her jaws found the shoulder of the gray wolf, her teeth sank until the taste of blood went copper and hot. He held and twisted, trying to throw her weight off, but she held, letting go only to rip again, lower this time, tendon and intent both giving under her bite. He stumbled, went to 3 legs, rage overcoming caution. The lean rogue took his chance, raking claws across her side. Fire ripped along her ribs, the world flashed white and then red. She pivoted, drove him back, and learned the rhythm of this particular hunger, too fast, too messy, striking before thinking only of the next strike. She gave him space to overreach and then punished it, once, twice, until his breath rasped and his courage stuttered. The third wolf circled. A hunter without patience. He darted for the sling. Celine snarl peeled bark from trees. She went vertical, front paws off the ground, back legs planted, weight pivoting into a slam that cracked against his muzzle and turned him away from Kaelin by force. He reeled, stunned by the outrage in her body. Some part of him, the part that remembered a mother before he lost a pack, seemed to reconsider. Gray recovered and came again. They met in a crash of bodies, her smaller frame slipping under his weight to wrench at the muscle along his chest. He yelped, staggered, and the lean rogue finally read the math. 3 against 1 was no longer 3 against 1 when the one fought like future. He hesitated, then backed, then ran. The third followed, the sound he made closer to apology than retreat. Gray stayed because pride kills. Celine did not give him a chance to decide differently. She closed, head low, teeth finding throat. He thrashed, claws scoring furrows across her shoulders. She tightened until his movements changed shape and then ended, a long shudder tapering into stillness. The world rushed in, the smell of blood loud as bells, the ache of every place she'd been opened, the bright hot throb of skin that would scar if she let it. She staggered, shifted back on shaking legs, and caught the sling before it slipped. Kaelin whimpered, then quieted when her hand found the small geography of his back. "It's all right," she managed, voice a rasp. "It's all right, little wolf." It was not all right. Her side bled freely, a steady warmth soaking leather and cloth. She pressed a palm to the wound, teeth gritted, mind already cataloging what she needed, comfrey, clean water, a place to bind and breathe. She turned toward the river. And felt it. Power, clean and vast, rolling through the trees like cold weather making a choice. The scent followed a heartbeat later, pine cut under snow, iron cooled on stone, the order of a house that did not tolerate chaos. Not wild like the rogues. Disciplined. Heavy with authority. A pack moving as one. At its center, something larger than Alpha. A weight the forest itself tilted toward. Kaelin lifted his head, small nose flaring, as if even he recognized the change in air. Celine straightened because fear of this kind wouldn't let her crouch. She wiped blood from her palm onto the moss and curled that hand into a fist. She did not run. The cave was too far. The river would not hide her. And she would not show her back to a power that could smell weakness from the next ridge. They appeared all at once, wolves sleek and silent, their formation more geometry than movement. They flowed to a stop with the ease of animals who know exactly where they end and their pack begins. A woman with a healer's satchel took one step forward and then stopped, not by order but by instinct. He came last, or maybe he had been there the entire time and the rest of them were merely the shape his presence made. A man in dark leathers, tall, carved clean as a blade that knows its work. His hair was night without softness, his eyes were winter metal. Authority radiated off him like cold off a lake at dawn, no heat, no apology, simply reality arranged around him because it had learned not to try otherwise. The Ice King. Celine had heard the name in whispers that traveled farther than borders. She had not believed in kings, only in men who wanted to be one. But the truth of him pressed against her skin, unignorable. He took in the scene without hurry, the dead rogue, the blood, the sling. His gaze never slid. It measured. It accepted. It decided. A low sound went through his wolves, almost a question. He did not answer them. He looked at Celine. She felt the weight of that look like a hand at her sternum, steadying and testing both. He did not look at her as prey. He did not look at her as charity. He looked at her as a fact the world had given him, and he was deciding where to put it. "Stand down," he said to his patrol without raising his voice. The words were quiet enough to be mistaken for kindness. They were not. They were law. The wolves eased a fraction. The healer's satchel creaked once as its owner remembered how to breathe. Celine tightened her hold around Kaelin. She did not lower her gaze. "If you've come to finish what they started," she said, and her voice, to her surprise, held, "you'll have to fight me for him." The barest shift touched the line of the king's mouth. Not a smile. Something like surprise discovering it remembered where it lived. His eyes dropped to Kaelin, lingered a beat that drew a different kind of ache through his face, and lifted back to Celine's. "Not today," he said. He stepped once toward her. His wolves did not follow. The forest, rude in its curiosity, leaned in. Celine's blood dripped warm into the cold air. Kaelin's fingers curled tight into her tunic, claiming fabric and heartbeat both. The Ice King stopped at the edge of her reach and made a decision that would change the shape of both their lives. "Come," he said. "Or bleed on my ground and make me carry you." The words were simple. The choice was not. Pride is a knife, you can cut yourself free with it or open your own throat. Celine stared at him for a long breath, anger and exhaustion and the iron weight of what she still had to do warring in her chest. Kaelin sighed, small and trusting, and rested his cheek against her heart. Celine nodded once. "Then walk," the king said, turning, trusting her to follow, and the patrol flowed around them like a promise kept. They left the dead wolf to the crows and the river's judgment. Behind them, the forest started breathing again. If that last look between them tugged at you, you already know, winter just met its match. Subscribe to the Alpha's Romance Library. Next, the Ice King's walls, his rules, and the first crack in all that ice. Chapter 5, The Ice King. The fortress rose like a shard of winter carved into the mountain. Dark stone, jagged walls, towers that pierced the gray sky, it was less a home than a warning. Even the air seemed to change as they approached, sharp and metallic, carrying the scent of discipline and iron will. Celine's body screamed with every step, blood soaking through her makeshift bandage, but she forced herself upright. Kaelin slept against her chest, the steady rhythm of his breathing the only anchor keeping her from collapsing. She refused to stumble, refused to show weakness before the wolves who surrounded her like shadows. The Ice King walked ahead, his stride unhurried, his presence bending the pack around him. No one dared move before he did. No one spoke. He carried silence like a crown. At the gates, wolves bowed their heads as he passed. Their eyes flicked toward Celine, some curious, some hostile, most unreadable. A rogue carrying a pup should not have been allowed inside these walls. Yet she walked under his protection, and no one challenged the command he had spoken in the forest. Inside, the fortress was as cold as its master, stone corridors lit by sparse torches, the air smelling faintly of smoke and steel. They led her to a chamber near the heart of the keep. It was more lavish than anything she had ever known, furs on the bed, a fire snapping in the hearth, a table set with roasted meat and warm bread. It felt less like hospitality and more like a cage with silk-lined bars. The healer from the patrol stepped forward, eyes lowered. "My lord, she needs tending." Celine stiffened. Her wolf rose in warning. But the king only inclined his head, a gesture so slight it was almost imperceptible. "See to her wounds." "And the pup," he said. His voice was deep, steady, as though nothing in the world could unsettle it. Then he left without another word, the heavy door closing behind him with a finality that made her chest tighten. The healer worked in silence, hands gentle but brisk. Celine let her, too weary to protest. Kaelin stirred when she cleaned the gash across Celine's ribs, his soft whimper reminding her to grit her teeth and bear it. Pain was nothing. Pain meant she was still alive. When the healer finished and slipped out, Celine sat on the edge of the bed, Kaelin tucked close, her gaze fixed on the door. She did not eat. She did not sleep. She waited, every muscle taut, for the Ice King to return. And when he did, hours later, the room seemed to shrink around him. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood near the fire, shadows flickering across his face, silver eyes unreadable. Celine refused to look away, though the weight of his gaze pressed against her like a hand at her throat. "You fought 3 rogues alone," he said finally. His voice was not admiration. Not curiosity. It was observation, stripped bare of anything but fact. "I fought because I had to," she replied, her tone sharper than she intended. Her hand tightened protectively over Kaelin's small form. "I won't let anyone take him." Something flickered in his eyes then, gone as quickly as it came. He looked at Kaelin, not long, not soft, but long enough for Celine to notice the way his jaw tightened, as if holding back words that might betray him. "You should be dead," he said. "Maybe I should," she snapped, heat rising in her chest. "But I'm not. And I won't let you or anyone else decide my fate." Silence fell heavy between them. The fire cracked, filling the space their words left behind. Finally, the corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but something less cold than before. "Good," he said. "Weak wolves don't belong here." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. His head tilted slightly, silver eyes catching the firelight. "Rest. You'll need your strength. This pack does not welcome strangers easily." Then he was gone again, the door closing behind him. Celine sat frozen, her heart pounding. She hated the way his presence unsettled her, the way his words slipped past her defenses. He was dangerous, not because he threatened her, but because for the first time since exile, someone had not called her weak. Kaelin shifted in his sleep, pressing his small hand against her collarbone. She kissed his hair, grounding herself in the only truth that mattered. "I don't need him. I don't need anyone. I only need you." Yet even as she whispered the vow, her mind replayed the look in the Ice King's eyes when he saw her son. It was a flash of something raw, something almost human, as if her child had touched a wound he kept buried beneath all that ice. And Celine, against her will, wondered what ghosts haunted the king who ruled winter. If you felt that tension, the way their walls clashed and cracked, don't leave now. Subscribe to the Alpha's Romance Library, because next comes the first spark of trust, secrets uncovered, and the fire that even an Ice King can't hold back. Chapter 6, Under His Protection. Morning broke like a thin blade over the mountains, no warmth, just light cutting stone. The keep woke in careful layers, boots in corridors, buckets thudding near wells, steel kissing whetstone with patient hunger. Celine listened to it from the quiet of her chamber, Kalen dozing against her chest, his breath a small, steady tide. The healer's salve pulled tight along her ribs, every inhale reminded her she was alive on purpose. Maeve slipped in with broth and fresh bandages. "You should walk," she said, voice practical as twine. "Let the lungs remember how to be brave. The garden's empty this hour." Empty would do. Celine bound Kalen into the sling, checked her knots twice, and followed the healer through the keep spine. Narrow arch, left turn with a nick in the stone at knee height, iron door that groaned like an old man waking. The walled garden held its own weather, frost-webbed herbs, a reluctant sun, birds rehearsing courage in the ivy. She breathed, slow and deliberate, and felt the ache soften to something she could carry. They made one slow circuit. Kalen's fingers found the edge of her braid and claimed it with sleepy ownership. She had learned a new arithmetic since exile, how to count by breaths, by heartbeats, by the weight of a child against her bones. Out here, it almost added up to peace. It shattered on a voice. "Look what the king dragged in." Not loud, sharp. A warrior's swagger flattened into sound. 3 men in training leathers lounged near the rosemary. The one in front, Scar lifting his upper lip, didn't bother to hide his stare. His friends wore that half-grin men put on when they've decided they won't be the first to stop. Maeve's body shifted without thought, a half step ahead of Celine. "Torin," she warned. He smirked. "Healer. Thought we were keeping vermin outside the walls." Celine didn't move at first. Then she turned, slow, and let him have her eyes. "You keep talking to test your teeth," she said, voice even. "Want to see which one chips first?" He took a step, casual in the way of men who think power is their birthright, and reached 2 fingers toward the sling as if flicking aside cloth that annoyed him. Maeve hissed. Celine's hand flashed out and caught his wrist. The air went still. Kalen stirred, then pressed closer, trusting her chest over the shape of the moment. "Try that again," she said softly, "and I will teach you where a body breaks and doesn't show." Something ugly flickered in his eyes. "You think the Alpha's charity makes you untouchable?" "I think I survived being thrown away," she said. "You don't scare me." "Don't." The word cut the garden in half. It didn't come as a shout. It arrived like weather changing, like a lake freezing in one clean thought. Torin's hand froze under Celine's fingers. Every bird fell silent. The scent of iron and pine thickened. Lysian stepped into the light. He moved as if the ground negotiated with each footstep and lost. The patrol ghosted at his flanks and then stopped dead without being told. He didn't look at Celine first. He looked at Torin like a carpenter at a crooked beam. "Explain," he said quietly, "what you were about to touch." Torin swallowed. "Alpha, What?" "Cold as stone and shadow." "Were you about to touch?" The sling." "And what is in the sling?" "A beat." "A child." "Correct." Lysian's gaze didn't blink. "In my house. Under my roof. Under my protection." He let the last word settle, heavy as a verdict. "Try again and you'll learn what protection feels like from the wrong side." A tremor ran through Torin's mouth where a grin used to be. "I was concerned for." "Your opinion wasn't invited." He let the man see the edge, then turned to the other 2. "If either of you had intended to correct your friend, you missed your chance. Consider yourselves corrected." He finally looked at Celine. Not into her. At her, inventory without insult, the quick medical glance you give a warrior before you put him back in the line. Color. Posture. The way pain sat in the shoulder like an unwelcome guest. "To all of you," he said to the garden, voice barely raised, "listen and remember. She and the boy are not your measures of loyalty. They are not your jokes, tests, or practice. They will not be touched, watched, or weighed. If respect fails you, fear will do." He didn't need to add what fear would look like. The courtyard already knew. The men scattered, relief clumsy in their feet. Maeve exhaled so softly the rosemary did it for her. Celine unclenched her jaw and felt the ache where she'd been grinding truth into a weapon. Lision took one step closer. Not into her space, not near the sling, just enough that the world would see where he stood. If they speak the child's name with anything but respect, he said, tell me. Then tell them to run. She searched his face. The walls were intact, but the ice had a current under it. This makes enemies, she said. No plea. A fact. It makes the right ones show themselves, he answered. He tipped his chin toward Maeve. Walk. They did. 3 slow laps. No one approached again. When he left the air warmer than he'd found it. Celine sat on the low stone bench, pale and heavy in that particular way only safe children are. Her body shook now that the moment had passed. Not with fear, with release. She let herself feel it. Then she put it away like a blanket you fold and keep near. He came to her that night. Not with witnesses. Not with wolves. The door closed behind him with that careful finality familiar to men who've learned how to keep secrets quiet. He stood by the fire first, as if aligning himself with light might make what he needed to say less carved. You asked why I brought you inside, he said without greeting. It wasn't mercy. I don't trade in that word. She angled Kaelin so the flame warmed his toes. Then what? A line, he said simply. I choose where mine is. A mother at my river is on the right side of it. The truth of it loosened something she hadn't realized was clenched. She nodded once. I won't make trouble under your roof, she said. But I won't be quiet either. Good. A ghost of something not cold touched his mouth. I've had my fill of quiet women who meant to kill me. She went still. He didn't let the silence grow teeth, he fed it a story. My mate, he said, voice scraping a little where pride had once lived, sold my pack's secrets for gold and a title. She opened my gates on the full moon. I buried my father. I took the traitor's head with my own hands. After that I stopped believing in fate. In mercy. In the goddess. He didn't perform the pain. He set it down between them like a weapon they could both see. The room changed shape around it. She called me curse, Celine said. The words came low, blade clean. He called me tainted. Then, when I told him I carried his child, he told me to disappear. He said if I spoke of it again, he'd end us both. The fire cracked. Kaelin sighed, small hand opening and closing against her collarbone. Lision's jaw tightened once, the tendon jumping like a struck wire. He refused a true bond and his own blood, he said, contempt precise. That's not an alpha. That's a coward with a crown. The validation landed in her chest like a steadying palm. It didn't fix anything. It made breathing less work. He is not the last of your enemies, Lision added, voice going iron under snow. If he comes to my walls, he will find them higher than his ambition. Celine traced a circle on Kaelin's back, feeling the small ribs under the small skin, counting the reasons to be patient and the reasons to be fire. I don't trust easily, she said. My life taught me not to. Keep the lesson, he answered. Aim it where it belongs. Silence came again, but it was a different animal this time, resting, not hunting. Celine shifted, and Kaelin's fingers, curious even in sleep, slid free and reached toward the dark figure by the fire. She caught his hand gently, redirecting out of instinct. Lision lifted his own, palm open, and let the tiny fingers curl over one of his knuckles, a brief, solemn touch, nothing like the flinch in the first hour. Pain moved across his face like weather and then cleared. What do you call him? He asked, voice careful. Kaelin. He repeated it, tasting it like a vow. Kaelin. The name sounded heavier in his mouth, as if he'd put a wall around it without asking permission. He turned for the door, then paused. While you breathe under my roof, he said, half to the wood, half to the room, no one will make you invisible. And after, she asked, because hope is easier to hold when you put a question mark on it. He looked back. The winter in his eyes hadn't melted. It had learned how to reflect fire without going out. After, we'll see if the roof needs to be larger. The door shut. The quiet he left behind was the kind that lets a body sleep without bracing. Celine lay back, Kaelin tucked in the cradle of her arm. The garden, the threat, the defense replayed in her mind like a story she didn't know how to accept. She closed her eyes and let the warmth of the hearth creep. Under his protection was not a promise she had asked for. It was a shield she hadn't realized she needed until someone else lifted it. Trust would come slow, if at all. But the old loneliness had lost its teeth inside these walls, and when she breathed, the air didn't fight her for the right. Outside, the keep settled into its night sounds. Somewhere above, a sentry shifted weight and scraped frost off stone with the side of his boot. Celine listened until the world clicked back into its place. Tomorrow would bring whispers, eyes, tests. She would meet them one by one. Tonight, she let her hand rest over the small, fierce heartbeat pressed to her. She counted it like a prayer. Not alone. Not anymore. If that vow, spoken and unspoken, sat warm in your chest, don't drift away. Subscribe to the Alpha's Romance Library. Next, the truth of Celine's bloodline, a messenger at the gates, and the first public line Lysian draws in sunlight. Chapter 7, Bloodlines and Betrayal. The day settled into a rhythm sharp as a blade's edge. The fortress tested her with stares and whispers. Every corridor she walked with Kaelin pressed against her breast was another gauntlet thrown down by wolves who did not know whether to fear her or despise her. She bore it the way she had borne hunger and exile, with her chin high, her hand steady, her wolf awake behind her eyes. Lysian did not seek her out often, but when he did, it was never by accident. He carried purpose in every movement, every word. He ruled like winter itself, inevitable, unyielding. Yet sometimes, when his silver eyes fell on her son, something fractured in that perfection. A muscle in his jaw would clench, a shadow would pass across his face, and then he would look away as if he'd revealed too much. Celine noticed. And though she did not trust it, she remembered it. One evening, while Kaelin slept soundly, she was summoned to the library. The room itself was a fortress of knowledge, its circular walls lined with shelves so tall they seemed to pierce the ceiling. Scrolls and books centuries old whispered of wars, treaties, bloodlines. The scent of leather and ink wrapped around her like old secrets. Lysian stood by the window, moonlight sketching his profile in silver. Across the table, an old wolf with a long white braid and eyes clouded with age unfurled a brittle scroll. His hands shook with reverence more than weakness. "This is Valeria's," Lysian said without preamble. "Our lore master." The old wolf inclined his head to her. "Alpha, the records are clear. Her father's name was Ronan. He was no deserter." Celine's breath caught. The word hit her like a stone thrown from the past. No deserter. She stepped closer, eyes fixed on the scroll as if it might rewrite her whole life. Valeria's traced the ink with one trembling finger. He was the last of the Silver Fang line. A noble house thought extinguished in the old wars. Brave. Honorable. A bloodline of warriors who never bent to corruption. The words landed like thunder in her chest. Her father, honorable? Noble? For her entire life she had been told he was a coward, a deserter who had abandoned her in shame. She had carried that weight, that stain, like a brand burned into her skin. And now the truth threatened to burn it away. Why didn't anyone tell me? Her voice cracked, jagged with rage and grief. Why was I made to believe I was cursed? Lysian's gaze found hers, steady, sharp. Because the truth threatened those in power. Ronan uncovered rot in your pack's leadership. He was silenced. Murdered, I suspect, by Darian's own line. Her knees nearly buckled. Betrayal coiled tight in her gut, hotter than fire. All those years, all those whispers, born of lies. Her father had not abandoned her. He had been taken from her. She pressed a hand against her chest, as though steadying a wound that had just begun to bleed after years of scarring. I carried their shame as if it was mine, she whispered. I let them carve me into their ghost. Lijan stepped forward then, closer than he had ever dared before. You were never the curse, Celine. You were the truth they feared. And now you carry a bloodline that makes Darien's look weak. Her breath shuddered out of her. For the first time, she felt something new rising in her chest, not shame, not despair, but power. A legacy she had never claimed was waiting, coiled in her bones. Before she could speak, the door slammed open. A guard strode in, armor scraped, eyes wide. Alpha. A messenger at the gates. He comes from the Blood Moon Pack. Every nerve in Celine's body went taut. Her wolf snarled inside her chest. The name alone made her blood run cold. Bring him, Lijan said. Moments later, a thin, arrogant wolf in Darien's colors was shoved into the hall. He straightened, brushed dirt from his tunic, and sneered as his gaze landed on Celine. I bring a demand, he said boldly. His voice was oily, the kind that expected to be obeyed. Alpha Darien claims what is his. The female Celine. And the pup she carries. He says you are harboring stolen property. Celine's hand went instantly to Kaelin's name carved into her heart. Rage swelled so violently her body trembled with it. Stolen property. That was what Darien called his own blood. His heir. Lijan did not move. He did not roar. He simply descended the steps of the library with the slow precision of a blade being unsheathed. His wolves filled the room, silent, deadly. He stopped before the messenger, silver eyes burning cold fire. Tell your alpha this, he said, his voice low but carrying. Celine is no one's property. She is of the Silver Fang line. She is under my protection. Her son is under my protection. They are part of this pack now. The messenger faltered, sweat breaking on his brow. Still, he stammered, Darien will not. Darien, Lijan cut him off, will learn that any hand reaching for them will be severed. Any wolf who dares call them stolen will meet my blade. Tell him if he wants war, he need only take another step toward my border. The air in the hall crackled with power. Every wolf present felt it, the absolute certainty in the Ice King's vow. The messenger paled, swallowed hard, and fled with his life, leaving only the stench of his fear behind. Celine's breath came ragged, her fists clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. She looked at Lijan then, not as a king, not as an alpha, but as a man who had drawn a line in blood for her and her child. The pack around them murmured, the sound of history being written in whispers. For the first time in her life, Celine was not an outcast standing alone. She was being claimed, not as tainted blood, not as a curse, but as something worth defending. Her heart thudded with something fierce and dangerous. Not trust. Not yet. But the seed of it. And maybe, just maybe, something more. If that vow sent a shiver through you, stay close, because Darien isn't finished, and the war for Celine and her son is only beginning. Subscribe to the Alpha's Romance Library and don't miss the moment love and war collide. Chapter 8, The Serpent Strikes. Night fell heavy and wrong. The keep was quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet, the sort that tightens a wolf's spine and makes even torches hiss lower. Celine sat in her chamber, Kaelin asleep in the crook of her arm, his small breath warming her collarbone. She should have felt safe within stone walls, guarded by warriors, shielded by Lijan's vow. And yet her wolf prowled restlessly inside her chest, ears pricked, hackles up. Something was coming. The first howl tore through the silence like a knife. It wasn't a patrol cry, sharp and disciplined. It was raw. Agonized. Cut short halfway. Then the fortress erupted. Shouts. The clash of steel. The thunder of paws pounding stone. The scent hit next, strangers, dozens of them, carrying the acrid stench of Blood Moon wolves. Darien's pack. They had come. Celine's heart lurched. She clutched Kaelin tight and rose to her feet as the door to her chamber burst open. Maeve, the healer who had tended her wounds, stood there pale but resolute. "Safe room," Maeve snapped. "Now." There was no time for questions. Selene followed, Kaelin pressed to her chest as they sprinted down narrow halls, the fortress trembling with battle around them. Every sound was a knife in her ribs, the scream of a wolf meeting teeth, the crash of bodies against stone, the roar of commands. Her breath came sharp. Her wounds ached. But she didn't stumble. She couldn't. Kaelin's life depended on her speed. They rounded a corner into a long, torchlit hall. That's when the shadows moved. 4 wolves stepped out, not soldiers but assassins, their movements too calm for chaos. One bore a jagged scar down his muzzle, his eyes glittering with cruel recognition. "Go," Selene hissed at Maeve, shoving the healer back. She set Kaelin down behind her, her body shielding him. Her wolf surged, already tearing at her skin. Maeve shifted instantly, a blur of fur and teeth, throwing herself at the nearest attacker. Brave. Foolish. She didn't last 2 heartbeats. A brutal swipe sent her crashing into the stone wall, blood blooming across her pale fur. Selene's snarl ripped from her throat as the assassins advanced. Every nerve screamed at her to fight. To kill. To end them. But the scarred wolf smiled, cold and calculated. His eyes flicked to Kaelin, peeking from behind her legs. "Not here to fight you, little wolf," he sneered. "We're here to take what's his." Before she could lunge, one of them slipped past her guard with terrifying speed. Rough hands snatched Kaelin from the floor. His small cry split the air. "No." Her scream tore through the hall. She spun, claws flashing, but the scarred wolf blocked her path. He was a wall of muscle and cruelty, his body pinning her in place while the others melted back into the shadows with her son. Kaelin's cry echoed once. Twice. Then silence. Selene's knees hit the stone. Her vision tunneled, blood pounding in her ears until the world was nothing but failure crushing her chest. Her arms ached with the memory of his weight already gone. The scarred wolf leaned down, his breath hot and foul against her ear. "Our alpha sends a message. Come alone if you want your pup back." His claws grazed her jaw, leaving a sting she barely felt. "Or don't come at all. We'll raise him to know who his real father is." Then he was gone. The hall emptied of their scent, leaving only blood, smoke, and the echo of Selene's broken scream. She collapsed against the wall, clutching the cold stone where Kaelin had been only moments ago. Her body shook with rage so violent it felt like fire under her skin. She had fought rogues. She had survived exile. She had given birth alone. She had clawed her way back to hope. And now Darien had stolen everything again. Footsteps pounded down the hall. Lysian arrived like a storm breaking, his wolves at his back. His silver eyes took in the blood, the broken wall, the empty space. He stopped dead when he saw her. Selene lifted her head, her face streaked with tears, her hands red where she had clawed the floor. "They have him," she whispered, her voice raw. "They took my son." The Ice King's face turned to carved stone. His wolves waited for his command, but he said nothing at first. His jaw flexed once, twice. The air around him dropped, heavy with fury leashed by control. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low growl that scraped the marrow of every wolf in the hall. "Darien will pay." Selene surged to her feet, her body shaking. "He wants me to come alone." He left that message. "Then it's a trap," Lysian said instantly. "I don't care." Her voice cracked with hysteria, with rage, with the shattering grief of a mother robbed. "He has my son. I will go. I will tear him apart with my own hands if I have to." Lysian caught her shoulders, his grip iron but not cruel. "You walk alone and you die. He will use you to destroy your child as well. That's what men like him do." Tears burned her eyes. "You don't understand. He's all I have. I can't lose him. I can't. The Ice King's voice cracked too, raw and sharp. And I cannot lose you. The words stunned her into silence. For a moment, the mask slipped, and she saw him, not the king, not the weapon, but the man who had buried his mate's betrayal, who had lived with ice in his veins, who now stood trembling with a fury born not just of duty but of something deeper. He pulled her against him, holding her as if anchoring himself to the same truth that was ripping her apart. You will not face him alone, he said, softer now, a vow pressed into her hair. We will bring Kaelin home. Together. Celine closed her eyes, her fists clutching his tunic. Rage and grief still clawed at her, but a fragile thread of hope wound its way through the wreckage. She wasn't alone anymore. And Darian would learn what it meant to steal from a mother who had nothing left to lose, and a king who had finally found something worth protecting. If that left your heart pounding, stay with us, because the rescue is coming, and the storm it unleashes will decide who truly rules. Subscribe to the Alpha's Romance Library, because the next strike will be blood for blood. Chapter 9, The Rogue Queen's Gambit. The hall smelled of smoke and steel. Maps littered the oak table, ink smudged by hurried hands, wax candles leaning crooked in their holders. Warriors crowded the war council, their faces tight with fury, their voices hot with demands for retribution. Burn their gates down. One snarled. Send the full force. Show them no mercy. They've taken the boy, another spat. We crush them now, before they can vanish into the mountains. The clamor rose, wolves snapping at shadows, their rage a living thing that wanted blood now. But Celine stood in the doorway, silent. Her eyes burned, red-rimmed from tears that had dried into salt and left her empty. Yet beneath the hollow grief, something new had taken root, sharp, cold, unyielding. She stepped forward, her presence slicing through the noise. You'll never reach him in time. The voices faltered. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, some dismissive, others curious. She ignored them all and walked straight to the table. Kaelin's absence was a wound, but it fueled her now. Every heartbeat was another step closer to strategy. I lived in those woods, she said, her voice steady, carrying over the growls. I bled in them. I know the paths your scouts never walked. If you send the army, you'll be walking into slaughter. The wolves bristled. One beta sneered. You're no general. You're a rogue with a child. Leave war to warriors. Her wolf surged, her grief sharpened into fury. She met his glare with eyes alight. A rogue kept your king's enemies from killing her son for months. A rogue fought 3 feral wolves and lived. A rogue survived what would have buried half your warriors. Tell me again what a rogue can't do. Silence slammed into the chamber. Even Lysian, standing at the head of the table, tilted his head slightly. Not disapproval, acknowledgement. Permission. Celine leaned over the map, tracing a path with her fingertip. The western swamp will drag your soldiers to their knees. Darian knows it, he'll bait you there. But here, she tapped the parchment, a ridge hidden by a rockfall leads to the fortress's rear. There's an old aqueduct. Sealed above, but the drainage grate below is rusted. One wolf can break it. Slip inside. Bypass his army. Strike at his throne. Murmurs rippled. Some skeptical. Some impressed. Darian expects you to come proud, loud, battering his gates like a king, Celine said, her voice hardening. He wants war he can parade as victory. What he will never expect is a mother crawling through his drains to rip her child from his hands. The air crackled with her defiance. This wasn't the voice of the cursed healer. This was something else. Something they had no name for yet. Kael, Lysian's beta, folded his arms. It's madness. Too few wolves, too much risk. It's the only way you'll see him alive, she snapped back. Darian doesn't want a war. He wants me broken. He'll keep Kaelin close, waiting for me. That's where I'll strike. Her hands trembled on the map. Not with fear, with the force of conviction. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Lijan reached out, his large hand flattening the map where hers still rested. His silver eyes pinned her, unblinking. She's right. The room erupted. Protests, growls, accusations of recklessness. But Lijan's voice cut through them all like a blade. Darien wants a king's war. He'll get a mother's war instead. We do this her way. The council fell silent under the weight of his command. His wolves shifted uneasily but did not dare argue again. The Ice King had spoken. Selene felt the breath leave her lungs in a rush. For the first time since Kaelin had been taken, a path lay before her. Dangerous, narrow, lined with blood, but a path nonetheless. Lijan dismissed the council. One by one, the warriors filed out, casting her glances that held both suspicion and reluctant respect. When the chamber emptied, it was just the two of them. He turned to her then, closer than strategy demanded, his voice lowered. This plan, it is a thief's gamble. It's dangerous. She lifted her chin. He stole from me first. Let me show him what it means to steal from a mother. Something flickered in his eyes. Pride, admiration, something even warmer. He reached beneath his tunic, pulled out a cord. Hanging from it was a silver pendant shaped like a wolf's paw. He placed it in her hand. This was my mother's, he said. She gave it to me when I became alpha. It is the heart of our pack, strength, loyalty, unity. It belongs with you now. Her breath caught. She closed her fingers around the pendant, the cool silver biting into her skin. No one had ever given her anything that wasn't meant to break her. I don't need symbols, she whispered, though her voice shook. No, he said softly. But you deserve them. Her throat tightened. And for the first time since Kaelin had been taken, she felt something pierce through the grief, hope, fragile but alive. That night, as the fortress prepared for war, Selene sat by the fire in her chamber. Kaelin's absence was a hollow ache, but her hand rested over the pendant at her throat. She closed her eyes, whispered a vow to the darkness. I will come for you, my son. Not as the healer they cursed, not as the rogue they despised, but as the queen they feared. And somewhere in the distance, across forests and rivers, Darien sat on his throne, certain he had already won. He had no idea the storm gathering in the shadows. If that plan sent chills down your spine, hold your breath, because the next step takes us into enemy walls. Subscribe to the Alpha's Romance Library, because the rescue is coming, and it will cost blood. Chapter 10, Through the Shadows. The night wrapped itself tight around the mountain, a dark cloth pulled taut so even moonlight couldn't slip through. Breath turned to frost. Sound turned careful. 6 figures moved like a single thought, Selene in front, Lijan at her shoulder, Kael and 3 shadows behind. No banners, no clatter, only cloth-softened steel and the low rasp of air when a lung remembered fear. Selene wore the wolf's paw at her throat. It was cool against her skin, a steadying weight, the kind of promise you don't say out loud because saying it makes it smaller. She touched it once, then pushed vine and thorn aside to reveal the grate, iron rotted to the color of old blood, half buried in silt and stubborn memory. Here, she breathed. Kael wedged the crow spike. The grate complained in a long, tired groan. Selene wrapped both hands around a bar and pulled. Pain rang up her healing ribs, she held it the way you hold a child in a storm, tight, knowing it matters. The metal gave, then tore free with a sharp cry swallowed by the waterfall's hiss. Cold air exhaled from the tunnel. Stone, damp, and the stale, sour breath of a fortress that had forgotten this throat existed. Selene went first. The aqueduct squeezed them down to elbow and knee, a crawl through darkness where the world shrank to knuckles finding purchase and the drip that counted time like a cruel priest. Selene mapped turns by touch, the rougher seam meant left, the smoother lip meant up. She didn't stop to think about what she was doing, thinking was a door that opened into doubt. She counted instead, 3 handholds, 2 breaths, 1 more life waiting at the end of this throat. Lijan breathed behind her, an anchor that never tugged. He didn't hurry her. He didn't steady her. He was steady, so she didn't have to split herself into fear and forward. A maintenance hatch gave under her fingers. Warm air slipped through, carrying tallow, smoke, and the faint copper of too many wolves sleeping badly. She eased the slab aside and rose into a seam of corridor, servant narrow, candle lit, all the castle's blood moving where courtiers never looked. They moved fast. Twice they pressed flat while boots thunked overhead, guards with the bored cadence of men who mistake routine for safety. Celine cut through the scullery where steam fogged the small windows and grease hid the scent of strangers. A woman looked up, saw nothing, looked down again. In war, even kitchens choose what to see. Cale ghosted a sentry into silence. Another fell without finishing a thought. The team stacked in door shadows when voices scraped by, then poured forward again. Every corner was an argument solved by restraint and speed. Celine's body remembered the language of hunger and danger, her feet wrote sentences the fortress didn't notice until they were already over. They reached the old cistern, now a storage room. Through a crack in the far wall came another sound, the tiniest complaint in the lungs of the world. A childish, exhausted cry with its blade filed down to thread. Kaelin. The room went bright and narrow all at once. Celine didn't breathe so much as choose air. She slipped through the crack, pain sparking along her side and dying at the edge of her focus. The closet beyond had been cleared badly, empty shelves shoved crookedly, straw scattered to pretend comfort. In the middle sat a gilded cage, the kind used to make cruelty look expensive. Kaelin reached for her through the bars, face blotched with tears, eyes bright with the stubbornness that had her blood in it. He said nothing. His hand said everything. The nearest guard frowned, confusion, then alarm, but Celine was already there. One blow across the throat, clean and precise. The second guard had time to open his mouth and fill it with blood. Key, click, door flung, boy gathered. Kaelin collapsed into the shape his body already knew was the safest place in the world, the fit of his chest against hers. "It's me," she whispered, voice steady because his needed it. "I've got you." He made a small, angry sound that wasn't crying anymore. Fury, learned young and used correctly. She tucked him into the sling, binding leather tight, letting his weight settle until he belonged to her balance again. A horn blared deeper in the keep, short, urgent. Alarm. Lysian's eyes met hers. Not a question. An agreement that what came next had been decided 3 days ago when the messenger spat property into their courtyard. "Throne room," she said. "Throne room," he returned, and the six became a blade. The corridors changed tone, shouts slung like spears, boots and rhythms that meant men weren't sure which way to run. Celine threaded them through panic as if she had drawn this path on a map only she could see. Twice she stopped and let danger pass so close she could count the stitches on a guard's sleeve. Twice she took a wrong turn on purpose so the wolves behind them would lose the scent of their fear and follow the louder trail of someone else's failure. They reached the last arch and stepped into a room built to make visitors feel small. High ceiling. Banners heavy with red. A throne that sat on too many steps. A man at the top with a grin sharpened like a blade for gutting. Darien. He lifted his silvered sword as if it were a certainty. "And here she is," he called, voice warm with theft. "My mistake returned with the king who mistakes himself." Lysian didn't answer him. He didn't give the room a speech. He crossed it. Steel met steel. Sparks learned how to fly. Darien fought like a man who believed spectacle could do the job of substance. He slashed wide, Lysian cut close. He shouted, Lysian breathed. Every strike Lysian loosed went where it meant to and took what it intended to take. The guard surged to keep Celine away. She moved like hunger does, no waste, no apology. A cut at a hamstring, a heel to a knee that didn't understand humility, a soft, terrible efficiency that came from knowing who mattered and who didn't between her and the boy at her chest. Cale and the shadows sheared the ring thinner with each breath until the throne room's noise learned to fear itself. Darien ducked, fainted, recovered a little of the ugly grace he'd polished in ceremonies and ambushes. Then he changed the rules. His hand flashed. The blade that found his palm wasn't just steel. It burned the air white. Silver. The first slash kissed Lysian's ribs and turned warmth into a cold that ate. He staggered and caught himself without taking a step back. The second swipe cut deeper. Blood slicked leather. The room smelled different. Darian smirked, certainty sliding back into his bones. Cold King. Let me show you what burns. He raised the blade for the finishing arc, the one that would write triumph in the air before it wrote death in flesh. Selene moved. She shoved Kaelin into the pocket behind a toppled shield, binding the sling to stone with a single, brutal knot. She'd trained her body for this choice since the night under the cypress when she realized the world would always try to split her in half. She didn't hesitate. The change took her mid-stride, skin to fur, bone to something older, pain bursting into a light her wolf ate for fuel. She hit the steps a storm in a small space, jaws finding Darian's sword arm where the tendon spoke the truth of his strength. Bone cracked like bad faith. Silver rang against stone and spun away. He punched. She shook it off, dropped low, drove her shoulder into his knees. He toppled, ugly and sudden, and rolled, scrambling for dignity he'd already lost. She was on him, shifting back into hands that knew how to do fine work. Her knee pinned his wrist. Her palm crushed his throat. You used my name to make yourself taller, she said, not loud, not soft. You tried to own what you were too small to deserve. Here's what I own. He bucked. She didn't move. She looked once at Lysian, not for permission, not for absolution, but to share this exact weight with the one person who wouldn't pretend it wasn't heavy. He nodded, a small, grave thing that said I see you. I will stand with the truth you choose. Selene finished it. Silence tore through the room like a cloth ripped straight down the middle. A banner sighed, finally honest about its job. One by one, weapons hit stone with the relieved clatter of things excused from doing harm. Selene stood, breathing hard, blood, his, theirs, hers, painting her in proof. She crossed to the shield and unbound the knot with fingers that didn't shake now that the work was done. Kaelin blinked up at her, furious at being left and overjoyed at being found. She gathered him into the shape of home. Lysian straightened, hand pressed to his side, eyes clear even through the pain. He stepped to the dais' edge and spoke without raising his voice. The line that poisoned this pack ends here. Knees hit stone, slow at first, then as if gravity had changed its mind about how to behave. Not submission to terror. Recognition of a thing the room had been starving for. Truth. Selene climbed 2 steps and stood beside the king. Not behind. Not below. Beside. The pendant at her throat was a point of light in all that dark stone. Kaelin's fist tangled in it and claimed what it meant without asking. Outside, night held its breath a final time. Dawn started somewhere beyond the ridge, a quiet line of pale fire gathering itself to cross their faces. It would find them soon enough. Selene pressed her cheek to her son's hair and tasted salt that wasn't loss anymore. She let herself believe the simplest sentence she'd ever been given permission to hold. We're going home. If that rescue lit something steady in your chest, don't miss the dawn that follows. Subscribe to the Alpha's Romance Library. Next, the sun rises on a queen, a kingdom learns a new oath, and love stops being a secret and becomes law.